It has to be joyful, effortless, fun. TV defeats its own purpose when it's pushing an agenda or trying to defeat other TV or being proud or ashamed of itself for existing. It's TV. It's comfort. It's a friend you've known so well and for so long. You just let it be with you. And it needs to be okay for it to have a bad day or phone in a day. And it needs to be okay for it to get on a boat with LeVar Burton and never come back. Because eventually, it all will.
Community is my favorite TV show of all time. It is a primary reason why I created this channel, and it's why I want to eventually write for TV and one day showrun my very own sitcom. I owe a lot to the show, and frankly, it owes a lot to me too. I've spent hours upon hours consuming it. I probably could have learned code or done something more productive if I wasn't. With its rich understanding and homages to everything film and TV and its ridiculously well-written characters, Community is a sitcom designed for me, and just about anyone with a deep passion for television. Despite struggling in ratings during its tenure with NBC and its subversion of the big network sitcom genre, much to the big network's dismay, the show received high praise for its trademark meta-humor, the performances of the immensely talented ensemble cast, and the consistent high quality in writing and direction. But why though? In this video, I want to discuss what makes Community different than anything on TV, while also being my go-to comfort watch. And in this first episode, I want to dive into how the episode Contemporary American Poultry first differentiated the show from the contemporary American sitcom. This is part one of a larger series I want to do on the show, so subscribe to see more Community content. In 2020, the pandemic sent me from my 90 square foot apartment in Seattle back home to Indiana for what seemed to be the foreseeable future. School was online and life was simple, but horribly boring and confusing, like I was living inside my head for most of every day. Greendale and the characters of Community found me at quite the fitting circumstance when I was missing my real-life school and the relationships that I had formed there. I was also entering my 20s, faced with a similar feeling of uncertainty that Jeff probably shared upon arriving at the steps of Greendale. I'm 22 now, and I just completed my last class perhaps ever, so I feel as though it's the perfect time to revisit Community, a sitcom that first and foremost is about dealing with change.
I know it's sad, but death is a natural part of life, and by the time I finish this sentence, 100 people will have died in China.
Why did you stop talking?
The story follows our protagonist Jeff Winger, an ex-lawyer who is disbarred when he is found to have faked his college degree.
By the way, they started using that as a seasonal arc on Law & Order. Total ripoff.
He enrolls at community college where he finds an interest in Britta, sets up a study group to get closer to her, and that's where we're introduced to all the characters. The premise is pretty simple. The pilot feels like your typical sitcom pilot, but does exactly what it needs to do to set up the characters for the show's first season. The narrative dexterity of Community is what made it so special. A sitcom that is able to dismantle and play with every genre and trope while also retaining emotional sincerity. But how is Community able to do this? The answer is very deliberate story structure, a simplified storytelling template popularized by series creator Dan Harmon labeled the story circle, processed from Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. I'm not going to speak at length about the story circle. A lot of people already have their own videos revolving around its use in the show, Rick and Morty, and other non-Harmon creations. But the 8-beat structure is what allows each episode to feel so complete, efficiently navigate both external and internal conflicts, and work even if half the jokes fly right over your noggin. But most importantly, it's the ideal method for creating positive change arcs for the characters each and every episode, across the season, and in the show as a whole. The plot of your average Community episode is either wild or completely mundane, either grounded or elevated by the narrative, conceptual ideas, and inspired genre filmmaking. Take, for example, Season 2, Episode 14, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, where practically the entire episode exists at the study room table, as a group literally plays a game of D&D. Or look at what is believed to be by many fans and critics the show's greatest episode, Season 3, Episode 4, Remedial Chaos Theory, where the group rolls a die to determine who has to go downstairs to grab a pizza. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the story and content is elevated by its homage to The Lord of the Rings and its deep understanding and appreciation of the fantasy genre. Despite the use of world-building sound effects and dramatic music, there aren't really a lot of tricks or any visual effects, and the episode was probably super cheap to produce. The episode works and is one of the funniest half hours of television because of the show's dedication to its characters, and not just witty observational humor or pop culture references. All the challenges, jokes, and beats of the story are motivated by the personalities of the characters in the study group, which in turn makes totally out-of-character moments like when Annie seduces the elf maiden that much more funny. This, coupled with a surprisingly dark stake, the reason that they're playing is to prevent Fat Neil from killing himself, is what makes Community stories so compelling. In Remedial Chaos Theory, another bottle episode, there really isn't even a plot at all. Instead, we were treated to 7 different alternate timelines, some sharing similar elements, such as Pierce gratuitously mentioning a sexual encounter with Eartha Kitt, or Jeff repeatedly bumping his head on the fan, all resulting from the roll of a die. It may be the greatest episode of the show, not just because of its high-concept sci-fi elements and humor, but because of its deep character exploration, with the alternate timelines serving as a device to illustrate how the group's dynamics change in the absence of each particular character. Now, these are 2 examples of a relatively mundane plot elevated by the narrative and concept, but what about the opposite case? What does Community do when the content is so ridiculous and ambitious to keep the story grounded? Well, it tries its best to take it seriously, find meaning in the chaos, and find humanity. This would be the case of most of Community's homage episodes. Epidemiology, A Fistful of Paintballs, Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas, Modern Warfare, Geothermal Escapism, the list goes on. All of these episodes are fantastic and deserving of their own breakdowns and praise, but for the purposes of this opening video, let's look at how contemporary American poultry riffs on the mafia genre to tell a story about leadership, control, corruption, and masculinity, and why I believe it is where Community found its unique voice. The episode starts like most Community episodes do, with an efficient cold open at the study room table where we receive the premise of the episode, that the cafeteria always runs out of chicken fingers, and that sucks because the chicken fingers are really good. That and the coining and minting of Pierce's iconic phrase, "streets ahead."
Does it just mean cool, or is it supposed to be like miles ahead?
If you have to ask, your street's behind.
After discovering that Starburns, the fry cook, is skimming chicken fingers, Jeff gets pissed and makes a plan to take over the kitchen. What ensues is a mafia/gangster movie homage following the rise and fall of the Greendale 7 crime family and Jeff and Abed's shared struggles obtaining and retaining power. What initially separates this episode amongst the first 20 episodes of the first season is that the story is mainly told through Abed instead of Jeff, as the latter initially delegates Abed to the role of the fry cook, inadvertently placing him closest to the source of power, the fingers. Both characters have very complete story arcs in this episode, but it's Abed, of course, who is literally the narrator, providing a voiceover similar to Ray Liotta in Goodfellas, which works well on another level because Abed is kind of the most objective member of the group, and as previous and later episodes reflect, the character who, oddly enough, is the most honest and in tune with the other characters' flaws and insecurities.
So we didn't damage your self-esteem or anything?
Bert, I got self-esteem falling out of my butt. That's why I was willing to change for you guys, because when you really know who you are and what you like about yourself, changing for other people isn't such a big deal.
But more obviously, he's the pop culture guy. The crux of his character is that he uses movies and TV to make sense of real life. He's also the only character who consistently breaks the fourth wall, and I don't need to tell you why narration is an OP storytelling tool for visual media, because it's obvious. It adds a subjective perspective on events that transpire, and allows the filmmaker to say a whole lot more than they can just through the characters in the scene alone. And for a story that tries to do so much and land as many laughs as it can in just 20 minutes, that's crucial. Community's pop culture references are the best, and markedly different than any other sitcom on television.
I prefer the term homage.
The writers of the show like to call these genre episodes homages instead of parodies or satires because the intention is more to affectionately borrow the style of the source material rather than to ridicule. In other words, it's admiration. Unlike a show like Family Guy, for instance, its intertextuality isn't just there for laughs. Jokes, of course, come along with it, but it's not just taking big swings at iconic movie moments and memorable lines, it's how the story is told, not simply our characters in cosplay. And forgive me for not thinking of a better example, but when we look at parody episodes from a sitcom like Family Guy and their Star Wars series, which I will admit are among the best episodes of the series and show some genuine love for the movies, we can see that they just don't work in the same manner. Peter isn't anything like Han, Chris isn't anything like Luke, and Herbert the Pervert is the furthest thing from Obi-Wan. Admittedly, Stewie as Darth Vader is pretty spot on, and having the characters portray iconic characters that are so far removed from themselves is indeed funny, but it's not a great storytelling decision unless you're solely trying to spoof, which they are here. But Community is doing something a bit different. The more references the audience can pick up on, the stronger the central in-world story is. For pure parodies like Family Guy, it doesn't matter because the story is the same either way. The story of contemporary American poultry isn't a summary of Goodfellas. It's just heightened by the references and details taken from it. For Community, the relationship to other forms of media is so important to how the characters are defined.
Whatever, pal. I ain't in it for your revolution. I'm in it for me.
Wait, Abed, this was your idea.
I know, but I'm calling dibs on the Han Solo role before Jeff slouches into it by default.
Sure, Community makes rather direct jokes and references to the genre it's portraying, like the inclusion of the Derek and the Dominoes song Layla during Abed's You Should Have Appreciated Me montage, but the key difference here is that the story of Community's episodes makes sense on their own, even to a viewer who grew up a Buddhist monk or whose parents didn't allow them to watch SpongeBob growing up. And oddly enough, these genre pieces are the episodes that are most in service of character development. And speaking of which, let's get back to Jeff and Abed. As the poultry operation scales and Abed gifts the group practically everything that they would want, Jeff's control over the group fades away, visually demonstrated by his inability to shush the group with the motion of his hand. He then goes to Abed to try to shut it all down, which Abed can clearly see through.
Unfortunately, the very thing that drove you to this dorm room is what would prevent you from properly running this machine, or even being a cog in it, your ego.
Jeff then goes to the group, who reject the idea that Abed has too much power and firmly establish their allegiance to Abed. Later, as the group becomes ungrateful, Abed recognizes the error of his ways and sends them a message by destroying the things that they love, and the group comes running back to Jeff to solve their problems.
You know, I thought you were like Bill Murray in any of his films, but you're more like Michael Douglas in any of his films.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, you have Asperger's.
Abed and Jeff's relationship is very complex. They are probably the two characters whose personalities and tendencies on the surface are the most removed from each other. Well, outside of Pierce and everyone else. So, episodes that they share together like this and the later episode Critical Film Studies are some of the most interesting half hours TV has to offer.
Can I tell you something I've never told anyone else?
Yes.
Although not the strongest relationship of the show, this being Troy and Abed, Jeff and Abed's shared difficulty processing change indicates that they're much more alike underneath their archetypal behaviors. It's worth noting that Jeff, of everyone in the study group, is usually the only one to pick up on Abed's references and quirks. Although it never made it to air, Jeff mentions in the script of the pilot episode that he was similarly raised by TV, and it becomes apparent as the show goes on that Jeff is just as much of a nerd as Abed is. He's just more hidden and insecure about it.
It's really great to have somebody to watch stuff with. My dad never wanted to watch anything, so I was kind of raised by TV.
TV's the best dad there is. TV never came home drunk. TV never forgot me at the zoo. TV never abused and insulted me.
Series creator Dan Harmon initially wrote Jeff to be the most honest reflection of himself, a selfish asshole who enrolled at a community college only to discover that people who he shared almost no interest with could be genuinely appreciated. But as the show went on, Harmon discovered that he had more in common with Abed, even going as far as to say that he diagnosed himself with Asperger's, which the show implies Abed has.
They really liked this Abed character, and they considered him a refreshing portrayal of someone with their so-called disorder, because he one of the most important things about him to them was that he didn't have Pinocchio syndrome. He didn't wish, he wasn't like, I really, if only I could have an emotion chip and be like all the normal boys and girls.
And this makes a lot of sense considering how effectively Community transitioned from a classic American sitcom about an asshole to a deeper ensemble comedy, and how many stories were later told through Abed. Jeff's struggle with moral ambiguity and selfishness, and Abed's difficulty understanding the emotions of others, is perfectly summarized in the episode's closing moments, where Jeff agrees to help Abed connect with people in return for Abed helping him do a better job with them. Not many shows in their first season are well developed enough to have the weirdest, most socially inept, and isolated character on the show suggest therapy to the show's socially masterful leading man and make it feel earned, make it emotionally resonant, and not present it simply as a joke. And even more impressively, not many shows can make it all make sense after a Goodfellas homage about chicken fingers. This heart and genre homages and all the ridiculousness is why some people just can't get into Community, but it's the reason I can't get out of it. Hampton Stevens of The Atlantic asks in his article, The Meta-Innovative Genius of Community, it's one of the most inventive shows in sitcom history, but can it make us care about the characters? I think you know my answer to that question, but let me briefly explain why.
Cool. Cool.
Oh.
Cool.
I farted during the fourth one. It's an inside joke.
Critics and fans can all agree that Season 4 was the absolute worst of Community. Not big mouth bad, but comparatively dull and uninspired for Community standards. It wasn't the worst possible outcome for fans. They still got their pop culture references, their holiday episodes, and there was still plenty of interesting material, like the body-switching Freaky Friday episode, the origin story that illustrated how each of the group members' lives have been intertwined, or the episode where all the characters are puppets. Okay, maybe the ideas aren't that great to begin with, but that wasn't the main issue. When Dan Harmon was fired from the show he created, he was replaced by totally new showrunners. Like, these dudes weren't even in the writer's room the first 3 seasons. Coming in after the absolute roller coaster that was Season 3, which found Community at its most unhinged, and I mean this in the best way possible, the new showrunners had to do all that they could to find that Community magic. There was just one fatal problem. They didn't understand the characters as well as Harmon did, and of course they didn't. All of the ongoing plot lines in the season, the Troy-Britta relationship, Changnesia, Jeff's meeting with his father, all failed miserably. It's like they changed the characters when they felt like it, but at the same time didn't actually develop them. Because of this, Community fell flat and was unable to grow up, leaving audiences with a disappointing senior year. Season 4 is what happens, and exactly what Stevens predicted would happen, to a show that neglects the key ingredient of its success. To put it in the most basic and admittedly uninspired way possible, the show was missing love.
I look at the images on that magical box as being the only as possible escape from a dirty living room and inconsistent friends and parents, laying, is it supine when you're on your tummy? In front of the cathode ray hug, and just letting this formulaic, consistent, beautiful, well-crafted mythology wash over you.
Despite being years off from double cancellation, there's a reason why Community's cast, writers, and fans are still rooting for a movie. Like Tom Brady or Kung Fu Panda, the show accomplished so much more than it was supposed to. It wasn't initially positioned as a smart and ambitious artsy dramedy. It didn't directly tackle major social issues just to be a very special episode or to be called brave by the Hollywood press. It wasn't even encouraged to be weird and inventive to win Emmys. It just was. It's the type of sitcom that I of course hope will be made again, but doubt ever will, especially on a major network like NBC. To quote an AMA from Dan Harmon, Community is a show about broken people. All of them are quite alone, some involuntarily, some by their own hand, some without realizing it, but none of them come to the study room table with the emotional advantages held by that mythical creature known as a normal person. There are no normal people, there are just different kinds of weird. All of it is human, and all humanity is better than everything inhuman. This is the philosophy of Community, and probably why you get that tingly feeling in your heart when the show pulls out a sincere emotional moment, just as you are done laughing at a joke about a pet monkey named Annie's boobs. Thanks for watching. I encourage you to like, comment, and share this video, and subscribe for more Community and TV content.